Good afternoon. First, giving all praise and honor to God. I'm extremely honored and deeply humbled to be a part of this great celebration. And I'd like to thank Mr. Harold and Mary Fulton Moore for their excellent hospitality and making yours truly feel right at home. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you why I'm regaled as though I am today. I'm a member of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. We're celebrating 150 years of service to the state of Texas. And I'd like to recognize the brothers and sisters from the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge that are here today. I also like to thank Brother Parmer from San Antonio Lodge No. 1 for making a recommendation that I be a part of this ceremony. So thank you. And of course, I have to recognize my better half, the Honorable Marion Elaine Jones Jackson, who in her own right is an elected official in Waller County. She's Justice of the Peace, Precinct 3, Waller County. Getting all the preliminaries out of the way, let's get down to business. I want to talk to you briefly about Dr. King's book. Where do we go from here? In that book, in the last chapter, he talked about the world house. In that chapter, it starts off where Dr. King says the author, a great author, one day died. And when they were going through his manuscripts, they saw that he had several that were unpublished. One caught their attention called The World House. In this, the author talked about a man that built a house for his children to live in. And he told them, y'all have to move into this house. You got to learn how to get along, regardless of the culture, mores you bring into the house, regardless of your little idiosyncrasies. You got to come into this house and learn to live together. The World House. He was using that to describe where we are on this planet. And let me just kind of ask y'all to go with me for a few minutes on an imaginary journey into the universe. If we look out into the great universe, we can see that we're part of a galaxy called the Milky Way. The Milky Way is composed of billions and billions of stars. And if you could go to the edge of that Milky Way and look out into the great universe, you see there are billions of galaxies. So we're one of billions, composed of billions of stars. And if you could look back at our Milky Way and try to find our sun, it'd be like finding the smallest speck of dust floating around in this yard here. And if our sun is that small, and the Earth is one of the smallest planets orbiting the sun, and if man is one of the smallest creatures on the earth, then the question still becomes, what is man? What is this? We're on this little bitty speck of dust, zooming around this great big universe at some fantastic rate of speed, going somewhere we just haven't figured it out yet. But Dr. King, in talking about the world house, had to come to himself. He had to say, who am I? He had to come and look at himself, and in the African culture, we call it Ubuntu. I am because we are. Nobody stands alone. Somebody had to pour into us to help us to become who we are. I am because we are. Ubuntu. When Dr. King had to look at his legacy, he had to go back to Mother Africa. And I could imagine he had to look back and say, from all of the elders that had poured into him, and say, wait a minute, if we could look at the human family, we'd have to go back to Mother Africa and do like the ancient black man that stood on the banks of the Mediterranean when they would ask him, where did you come from, black man? He would invariably say, I came from a place where the mountains of the moon meet the headwaters of the Nile River, and the great god Hapi lived. See, they call the Nile River Hapi because it was up in those high mountains. And if you looked at a map of Africa, you would see that Mount Kilimanjaro sits on the equator, and there's snow on this mountain. It's the melted waters that flows down from the south to the north to start the Nile River. and it brought the rich soil out of those high mountains down to that lower Nile River Valley, and Egypt was part of that legacy. They did a DNA of people, and they said that there's only one race on this planet, and that's the human race. And they traced that DNA back through the mother, back to Africa. And they said we all came out of one mother, and we symbolically call her Eve. But most of us learned that in Sunday school, didn't we? And if we all came from one mother, then this idea of race is more of a political idea than a biological fact. And we got to deal with that. You see, as Dr. King had to reflect on himself, he had to go back to ancient Egypt. He had to look at the legacy. How did we get here? How did we get in this position? And he come to realize that as a human being on this planet, and the ancient Egyptians that built the legacy that he was standing on, Dr. King had to realize that about 3,000 years ago, an ancient king came out of those mountains and reconquered the lower Nile Valley and started the first pharaohic dynasties of Egypt. The first pharaohs were black men, but they did a unique thing when they conquered the lower Nile River Valley. They started those pharaohic dynasties. They came up with this Egyptian mystery system. In that system, they believed that knowledge was power. They believed that knowledge was so powerful that everybody was not worthy to receive knowledge. That you had to hide knowledge from wicked people because they misused it against weak-minded people. You had to conceal knowledge as if under a veil from weak-minded people because it would drive them slap crazy. You couldn't tell everybody the truth. You had to take those people that had good character and pull them inside the tent, and you could teach them. And you see that legacy being carried out even today. And that's how we started as Masons. We built this up on this legacy of ancient Egypt. It goes back into time. We see that there were civilizations that came up on Egypt, whether it's the Persians, whether it's the Macedonians under Alexander the Great. They all came into Egypt. We knew that Alexander the Great was taught by his mentor, his tutor, Aristotle. We know Aristotle spent time studying in Egypt. We know that Plato spent 13 years studying in the temples of Egypt. And we also know that Pythagoras was denied entry for 21 years because the Egyptians said his intellect was not deep enough. And we know that them thuggish Romans came into Egypt. And when those thugs got the knowledge, they took it back to Italy. And we even know that it was the Emperor Constantine that would institutionalize Christianity. And when Rome finally failed, it was those priests that hid the manuscripts in those catacombs in the Vatican. And when they emerged, the Germanic kings said, what did we just destroy? And these Germanic kings are people we call white folks. They had names. Anglo, Saxon, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Burgundians. These people that sacked Rome sent Europe into a period called the Dark Ages of Man, when all knowledge was lost. But it would be those priests that emerged from those catacombs that would not teach everybody, would just teach the children of the kings of Europe. Teach them Latin, teach them how to read. Take them inside those cathedrals and teach them learning. There was so very few books available during that time. And we know that once Europeans came into their knowledge, they came into this period they called the Enlightenment. And Dr. DuBose said it like this. He said there were three streams of thinking that came down to us from the death ship. He said the first thought was the thoughts of the Europeans. He said the Europeans had come to believe once they had acquired knowledge that God had so blessed them that it was their duty to subdue the earth and all men, black, brown, yellow, white, and form this new humanity. But he said behind that thought was a dark afterthought of force and dominion, the making of black and brown and yellow men to delve in the temptation of bees and red calico with Cloyd. He said the second thought that came down to us from the death ship were the thoughts of the older South. He said the older Southerners also believed that somewhere between man and cattle. God created this tertium quid, this intermediate thing, and called it a Negro, a simple, clownish creature, yet lovable within its limitations. But Dr. Du Bois said behind that thought was an even darker afterthought that the older Southerners also knew, that perhaps by chance, some of them may become living men and women. So out of pure self-defense, we dare not let them. So they build around us a wall so wide and placed between us and any knowledge, a veil so thick that we would not even think of breaking through. And what is that knowledge? Most of us of African descent from West Africa. We were Igbo, Fulani, Shanti, Hausa, Yoruba, Mandinka. Those are some of our names, but all of this has been wiped from our minds. We had gods, Odulamare, Mviliange, Wiri, Ogun. All of this has been wiped from our minds. I'm speaking to you in English, and I'm not an Englishman. This tongue has been wiped from us. How did we get to this place? See, Dr. King had to come to, where are we? If he's gonna say where we go from here, he had to know where he came from. He had to look at the history of England. One of the culprits in this game, Queen Elizabeth, sent her privateers down to rob the Spanish who were robbing the people in Mexico for their gold. And she financed England from stealing gold. We call that gangsterism, or gangster capitalism. We gotta call it what it is. That's the legacy we was built on. And when they start conquering those islands and getting the sugar and the cotton, it made them wealthy. They lived off stealing and enslaving people. That's the culture we based on. And we even know that old Stephen F. Austin, when he came into Texas, that rascal came in and he lied. They said, what you doing, Austin? He said, I'm coming in. He said, I want to bring these entrepreneurs from the deep south because they wanted land. They're going to become Mexican citizens. But he knew that Mexico had their second president of the Republic of Mexico was Vicente Guerrero. And he was going to outlaw slavery. Vicente lost the election. Some now say Austin even voted for Santa Anna. But even Santa Anna got a bad rep, didn't he? Because Santa Anna knew that if he came up to San Antonio and freed the slaves, they would break the backs of those entrepreneurs. Why did he break their backs? Because these rascals came into Texas, and Austin, who's the father of Texas, also the father of slavery in Texas, told them for each one of them that came into Texas, the whole 300, for each Negro slave they brought into Texas, he would give them an extra 80 acres of land. A rich planter out of Alabama named Jarvis Ellison Gross brought in 110 enslaved African men, women, and children. He walked them into the Brazos River Valley, and all told that rascal got over 44,000 acres of land. His son, Leonard Waller Gross, got 66,000 acres of land. That land is in that valley, the Brazos River Valley. Gross's great nephew was Jarvis Ellison Kirby. He got several plantations and several farms, and got one on the occasion of his marriage to a lady named Helen Mars Swearingen. And they built a plantation they call Alta Vista, which is now Prairie View. I had to set that stage. We got to know this thing. King had to look at all of this story. Where do we go from here? He had to know where it came from. We can't play with this thing. Every speaker that got up and said, we can't play, we got to speak truth to power. But how do you speak truth to power? Because we got to tell the truth. Because see, when they set up Texas, it was done as a slave state. Right. Even this Alamo, I grew up in the big city of Luling, Texas, right up the road. And in Luling, every time the school bus would crank up, we was where? At the Alamo. We knew where David Crockett tied his horse. I had a big rubber Jim Bowie knife. I wore a coonskin cap and had a replica of old Betsy. And we didn't know we were celebrating slavery. Because them rascals were perpetrating slavery. They said, no, it's for freedom. No, it wasn't. It was to hold up the slave system, another part of gangster capitalism. We got to recognize there's a professor at the University of Houston named Dr. Gerald Horn. I would advise you look at his books on this counter-revolution of 1836 and the counter-revolution of 1776. He lays it out in a very scholarly fashion. But see, in Texas, we also know when they start telling the truth of the Alamo, they say, when the Mexicans went over the wall, the first thing the colonel asked, are there any Negroes here? And Joe, who was Travis's slave, came out of hiding and said, here he is. And one of the corporals tried to stab him with his bayonet, and the colonel blocked him with the saber and said, we have no war with the Negro, you free to go. Joe walked out of the Alamo, didn't he? So what does that say to us? We got a legacy, because this was part of Mexico. When they came in and took this land from Mexico, they had a bigger design. They was gonna take the whole region all the way down to Central America. That was the big design. Call it the Golden Circle. We got to know this history and tell the story, because what we're going through now is a legacy. And this was Dr. King was coming to that realization. He said, where do we go from here? Him and Harry Belafonte was having a conversation, and he said, I think I'm integrating my people into a burning house. He said, what you gonna do, Dr. King? He said, well, we got to become the firemen. We're the firefighters. We got to keep this legacy going, because we built America, we built Texas. Our legacy of labor is very ingrained in the blood in this soil. We owe nobody no apologies for nothing. And when those Buffalo soldiers came up here and stood in front of us, that spoke to that legacy, because we fought for our freedom. You see, we celebrate Juneteenth. That's the day the Union General Gordon Granger landed at Galveston Island 2.5 years after we was free, supposedly free. But see, where we come from in Waller County down in Prairie View, we didn't get the word on Juneteenth. We didn't get the word until August the 25th, when George Armstrong Custer and several cavalry troops rode into Hempstead. And I kept saying, why did Custer come to Hempstead? He came in there because there was a 3-star Confederate general still in the field of battle named Edmund Kirby Smith. Kirby Smith was waiting there in Waller County for Jefferson Davis and the rest of them to meet him in Texas, and they was gonna start that foolish war all over again. His headquarters during the final phases of the war was at his cousin's plantation called Alta Vista, Prairie View. Stay with me. So in Texas cultural memory, there's no recollection of them losing the war. They merely transitioned, because they hightailed it into Mexico because they didn't want to get hung. We are building a legacy here because these programs are important. And let me try to get this thing wrapped up, because I like to talk about this history and this culture, because it's important that we unveil this. You see, after the war, the question became, what we now do with these newly freed people? Do we kill them? Do we send them back to Africa? What do we do? The northern businessmen, who were the real winners of the Civil War, they came up with the idea to use education as a technique for social control. How do you educate them, but not just enough, just a little bit? You don't want them to be competitors with you. See, capitalism demands competition. Dr. King was moving away from that system of distribution. He was moving more toward democratic socialism. Listen to him. Wealth should be distributed equally, because when those capitalists came over, they were rebelling against that monarchical system coming out of Europe. It was the businessmen, the Plymouth Company, New England Company, then the businessmen that rose to power and challenged the Royal African Company that was headed by the King and Queens of England and was the largest importer of slaves into the United States, because they wanted a piece of the action. And they knew that they had two challenges. They had the American Indian, the indigenous people, and they had the African slaves that they had to deal with. And so they were bringing Europeans over, and they said, well, you come over, I don't care if you're Spanish, I don't care if you're German, I don't care if you're British. When you get to America, you're going to be white. So this idea of white supremacy was imported to the United States. And we got to deal with that. That's the legacy. King had to come to those realizations. But wait a minute, we're in this game. Yeah, you're in a bigger game. Because if we look at the world house, we look at this legacy that we are all standing on this little bitty planet, it's coming to our minds that, wait a minute, why is the world looking at us? See, everybody in the world don't love America. So I served in the Vietnam War, and I take R&R in the Philippines and say, Jack, why you riding with the beast? I didn't understand the beast, but when I go ashore in the Longa Post City, I saw it. I saw what Marcos and his people, his regime was doing there in the Philippines under martial law. I've been to Korea, I've seen it. Those of you who have served in the military know what I'm talking about. But we got to talk about this thing, but we got to do something about it. Because we are strong and mighty people. See, they lied to Dr. King, said they lied to the American Negro when they passed the first Civil Rights Act. We weren't supposed to go through all this craziness, but that was a game. Because see, when we came out of bondage, it would be men like Lawrence Wright Cuney, the first Grand Master of Prince Hall Masons, to take the lead. And we thought politics was the way, so CUNY became the head of the Republican Party in Texas. Back then we were Republicans, weren't we? We passed education laws. We created public education in Texas. They helped create and found Prairie View and Texas A&M University. They did this because they demanded education for their children. But then the Republicans turned on us. They refused to seat his delegation, CUNY's delegation, at the convention. He said, well, why did they do that? Because they knew that we were getting too powerful. See, because when you start enlightening people's mind and arouse that human intellect, they rise up and they start coming to themselves. Like when you be acting up as a child and your mom will tell you, sit down, boy, come to yourself. You wake up. And we are waking up. And we're going to continue to wake up. So Dr. King said they wrote a check to us. And it came back marked insufficient funds. And they started passing those laws, those codes to put us back in check. They had this conference over in where Europeans came together in 1884 and 85 when they carved up Africa. We were part of that carving. America was just as involved in it as anybody else. If you read those documents, look at what they passed in even 1930, where they really was voicing for white supremacy. This is no accident. Trump is no accident. No. It's a continuation of a process that started back when they became enlightened. Because they knew there was other people on this earth that had knowledge, that knew how to use that knowledge to come together. And see, when Dr. King had to get this spirit of Ubuntu, he said, I am because we are. He didn't come up isolated. He knew about John Henry Clark. He knew about Sheikh Anta Diop. He understood the scholars. He understood the elders. And I would invite each and every one of y'all to become knowledgeable of what we are dealing with. This is no damn accident. Trump is a gangster. Y'all know what he's doing. That's a continuation of this stuff. You don't bully your Congress where they get so new that they can't even say nothing. They held a conference, and I'm gonna wrap it up, Ms. Fuller. They had a conference in a place called Cape Palm Springs, West Virginia in the 1890s. And none of the Negroes were invited, only the wealthy businessmen, the capitalists. And then that young Rockefeller showed up with him. He was so impressed with they had designs that come to put the Negro back in check because we was getting too powerful. See, what CUNY messed up, his grand secretary created the Fraternal Bank and Trust in Fort Worth, where they could loan money to newly freed people and they could buy land. And most of y'all say, yeah, my great-grandfather used to own 200 acres of land. Well, where was he getting the money? He was getting it from the Masons. We were the bankers. It was run by a man named William Bill Gooseneck McDonald. Know our legacy. Know why we standing here before you today. But see, when they came at this conference in Cape Palm Springs, they came up with a scheme. And young Rockefeller was so impressed, he went back and told his father. He said, Daddy, we got a plan. And the old man Rockefeller was so impressed with the plan. Between 1901 and 1921, he contributed over 129 million of his own money to the process to put us back into this condition. Money put us back here. Conservatives put us back here. See, conservatives believe that there's a hierarchy of people, and it always goes to the top. All these rascals want to get right there where the king and queen sit. And we know that Rosenwald was part of that. Julius Rosenwald built those schools, him and Booker T. White. So he did it because he loved us. He was a businessman. He said it's going to be a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 deal. He put in a third, blacks had to put in a third, and the school districts had to put in another third. And those of us who went to those segregated schools know that it wasn't always equal. You come to Prairie View and you look in the Texas Constitution and say, wait a minute, there are 3 universities of the first class in the state of Texas. University of Texas, Texas A&M, and Prairie View, only 3. Why does Prairie View look like it looks? Oh, we got a problem, don't we? So I want to commend this commission, because the question is, where do we go from here? With the spirit of Ubuntu, I am because we are. We got to move forward. We got to commit ourselves to recovering our knowledge, because the ancient Africans told us, know yourself. Know who you are as a person. Know yourself. Man, know yourself. And then we got to commit to service. And that's what we do as Masons, as a fraternity, Divine Nine. We commit service to helping others. That's the greatest cause we could do. And even with the World Conference of Mayors, we're working with the people of the Gambia right now, because the young girls can't even go to school when they have their monthly cycle because they don't have napkins. They can't even afford napkins. So we send over 15,000 napkins, but we need more in a 2-for-2 project. Then they say, why can't you just reuse them? They say, we don't have clean water. There's a problem with clean water right now in 2026. So we built at least 3 water wells and working on the 4th. We got a lot of work to do, y'all. We got a hell of a lot of work to do. And Ms. Fulton and Mr. Fulton, I want to thank y'all for letting me ventilate for a few minutes. I apologize for keeping y'all out here, but know who we are.